The following content is not intended as a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Always Another Way podcast. My name is Marina Spracke-Spriggs, and I'm your host. I have a master's in professional counseling. I am the IPPY Award-winning author of Stop Looking for a Husband, Find the Love of Your Life, and Nasty Divorce, A Kid's Eye View. I write positive divorce advice for the HuffPost, and I'm trained in clinical hypnosis. And this podcast speaks to out-of-the-box thinkers, and it's for those who hear the call of hope and always another way. And if you're very rigid and set in your beliefs, this is probably not your cup of tea. However, you should note, taste can and do change. And I am super excited about today's guest because with Always Another Way, you know, anyone that does things another way is like a beacon coming to me, or I go to them. And this is a woman who just went totally another way and is bringing some awesome stuff to you. So I am going to introduce her. It's Maraliz Campos, and she is a wellness guide, equipping others with the tools to deal with stress by shifting their unconscious reactions to chosen responses. Her methods have helped her transition her own body from a state of severe disability to remission. She's a certified sound practitioner, yoga instructor, meditation facilitator, DJ, and sound designer who offers workshops, sensory events, original recordings, and teacher trainings around the United States. She guides her students through increased self-awareness, yoga therapeutics, meditation, and sound vibrations using her kinesthetic instruction, all while living with chronic illness and physical disability. Sonic mindfulness has been an integral part of her work for the past 3 years. Her certification was completed and she has studied with Sarah Oster in New York City, Sylvia, I'm going to butcher somebody's names, Nhat, Dr. John Ballou, Wendy Young, Lynn Tran, and other industry pioneers. Maraliz completed her yoga teacher training while undergoing chemotherapy in 2015, after which she shadowed Jewel, help me out here.
Jill
Kutch for 8 months in therapeutic yoga at the Dallas Yoga Center. And her transmission ceremony of Thich Nhat Hanh's 5 mindfulness trainings was completed with Terry Cortes-Vega at the Dallas Meditation Center. Maraliz now helps others ease stress and vibrations with movement using personal recordings, Himalayan and crystal singing bowls, tuning forks, violin, vocal looping, synths, and percussive instruments. And it is, whoa, amazing. So please welcome to the show, Maraliz. Hello.
Hi.
And thank you. I'm just like a butcher of names. But you'll correct me as we go here.
That was actually pretty good.
Okay, so I'll do my best with the reading as we go. But I kind of want to start initially to sort of bring people up to speed, like what brought you to this, to talk a little bit about where you were, what you found, and then we'll dive into everything that you do and how cool it is.
Yeah, that's actually a perfect place to start.
Okay.
So when I was in my early 20s, I was feeling like really shitty. And then all of a sudden I got diagnosed with 12 different diseases, all at once. So I was pretty shocked because I had been just trying to still work. I moved around internationally, was working in a nonprofit. I lived in Korea and worked with North Korean refugees. I lived in Paraguay working with victims of sex trafficking. I moved back here and was working with the International Rescue Committee and victims of domestic violence. So I was putting myself in all of these situations where I was working with people who had severe suffering, but I at the same time was also suffering so severely. I just didn't know that there was you know, something physiologically going on. I started to think, because after you go to so many doctors and they tell you nothing's wrong, or they tell you things like you just need to stretch more, which a doctor actually told me, or that fibromyalgia is not real, then you start to think like, whoa, is this all in my head?
They give you the woman's crazy disease.
Exactly. Yeah. Which, you know, historically is something that has precedence. Like women were put into insane asylums because they were called crazy when they actually had actual physical diseases. So that's kind of what happened to me. And so I started to believe it and believe this constructed narrative that everything was in my head. And finally, I moved back to Dallas and I found a physician, a rheumatologist, Dr. Dimon Basu. For anyone who's looking for a quality rheumatologist, he absolutely changed my life. He, the first day, diagnosed me with fibromyalgia and then started to do all these tests and found the rheumatoid arthritis, the lupus, the Sjogren's syndrome, the POTS syndrome, the localized epilepsy, the chronic migraines, the scoliosis, just like...
Not in your head.
Yeah, like this list of really intense diseases that if I had had even just one of them, I would have been really struggling. But the fact that I had 12 of them really compounded my experience of physical pain. And all of my sensory input really became this crazy experience of everything hurting all the time. So it got to the point where I was wearing sunglasses inside even, just 24 hours a day, because even this light, like any kind of light, was too intense and would cause pain. Having some kind of blanket against my skin was excruciating.
Oh, man.
I eventually got so bad that standing up became nearly impossible. And so I had to crawl around on hands and knees.
Oh, my. But it's all in your head.
But it's all in your head. So I was crawling around on hands and knees, and the way that I would brush my teeth is I would grab onto the sink. I would kind of like hoist myself up to grab what I needed and then brush my teeth. And then I would hoist myself up to spit and hope that I made it into the sink. So that became kind of a fun game.
Yeah.
So I got to this point, and really there's not much else you can do other than sit with yourself, and you have these two choices. So my two choices became, I could either suffer and continue suffering, or really the only other option I had was to see this as a different kind of adventure.
Nice.
And, you know, it wasn't like an overnight kind of thing where I all of a sudden got there the next day after my diagnosis and was like, ooh, I'm going to see it as an adventure. It took a while, and there was a process of mourning the person that I thought I was, allowing myself to feel the death of the person that I identified as all of my physical abilities were taken away. So I had to allow myself to go through that. And there's a lot of shame and guilt and sadness and fear associated with that. But instead of trying to run away and practice an aversion to those things, which would in reality actually make me focus on that more and make me cling to it, I chose to be in it fully and be communicative with those around me, because they had no idea, they couldn't feel, and I don't look like anything's wrong with me. So I chose to be completely present with that degree, intense degree of suffering, while also externalizing through constant communication. And then eventually got to the point where I was recognizing these two choices. So I decided, hey, I might as well try to learn how to explore who I am now and see it as some kind of adventure where it's all unknown. Every single second, I don't know if my body is going to work or not. So I might as well see it as like something like rock climbing or bouldering in the dark. And so that's what I started to embark on.
Nice. And then I was just thinking about this before. Were you kind of just like pretending that things weren't wrong before? Or were you a little bit open about it? You know, because sometimes with those silent illnesses, I know a lot of people just do that because you can't see. And then people are just get more questions or whatever that you can't answer.
That's a great question. So what I first did was actually try to explore alternative forms of healing. So I went to chiropractors, I went to Chinese medicine, I went to acupuncture. I was pursuing all of these different things because I had a fear of Western medicine and chemicals, and I did not want to put that in my body. And also, we so often kind of feed this narrative in the wellness industry that we need to stay completely away from chemicals and stay completely away from Western medicine. So that was a big realization to me after a while, because the fact that I didn't get a diagnosis first really sent me down a rabbit hole in any direction, and I didn't know where I was going. So I developed secondary diseases. Mm-hmm. And because of that, my number of diseases went from like 6 to 12. And so that was something that was really eye-opening, and really as an instructor, as a guide, as a practitioner now, is a big part of my message that whatever direction we're going in, if it involves Western medicine, Eastern medicine, that's not really the focus. The focus is really getting to know yourself so intimately that you can discern which direction at which point in time is best for you.
I love that, because really Western medicine is not evil. There's lots of really, really great, wonderful things about it too. So, and life-saving stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. And if I hadn't, I did resist even being on chemo for a whole year. And the chemo was also for the autoimmune, because my immune system was like, you're not paying rent. You need to leave the body. And I was like, no, but I created this, so I'm going to stay. And I resisted the chemo for a year. And then it got to the point where I just absolutely couldn't even sit up on my own. And someone had to like lift me up to a seated position. So forget like washing your hair or anything. A lot of sweatpants that year. Yeah. And then I finally agreed to take the chemo treatment, and it's very low doses of chemo. It was methotrexate, which was actually originally used to treat childhood tuberculosis. So it's interesting. So I was on that for 2 years, and I took it once a week.
And that was helping you, and then you started to feel a little bit more relief?
So I wouldn't necessarily say relief. The symptoms were different. Okay. And they became, my experience became less colored by one extreme sensation all the time, which was overwhelming pain. Okay. And instead was then colored by bouts of exhaustion, nausea, pain, you know, so it was just changing and creating different memories in my short-term memory that would then diversify my experience and made it more bearable. Okay. And then eventually my symptoms did start to lessen, but that wasn't just because of the chemo. About 2 weeks after I started chemo, I entered into a yoga teacher training certification.
Way to go. Yeah. I'm not just doing chemo. I'm going to start something else. Cool.
Well, I had to leave my job where I was working with domestic violence victims. And that was the process of leaving my career in nonprofit was really excruciating for me. And that took the longest because I was so stubbornly clinging to that identity that that's who I was. You know, all I ever wanted to do was to help people who were suffering. And then even though I could barely do anything, I was like, I'm going to still do it. So that was really, really excruciating. And then when I got on the chemo, I just thought like, I can't just do nothing, right? As if like, taking chemo is nothing. Right. And so I found the Dallas Yoga Center, which actually was really close to where I lived, and they were doing a teacher training. I didn't tell any of my fellow students that I was on chemo until after the training. My instructors knew, and they were so amazing and supportive of my practice and really integrating these therapeutic yoga movements, breath work, mindset into my everyday life. And I would say that the combination of the Western medicine, changing my diet, really incorporating more herbs. I'm from Paraguay, and in my country we use a lot of herbs to treat different things. Incorporating more herbs, different types of movements that were more loving to my body and that were speaking my body's actual language. And also incorporating the sound practices and the mindfulness meditation. All those things in conjunction really, really brought me back to life.
Cool. Well, then let's dive into that. And so with this, and you are a sound practitioner now, so tell everybody, so that'll help you, how does that work? And how did these things kind of work for you? And how do they work for others? And we'll just dive into that. Yeah.
So I am obsessed with sound. And to give a little context about the type of shape that my work takes, accessibility as someone who is disabled, as someone who's a woman, as someone who's like Latina and comes from an immigrant family, for me, accessibility and diversity is so important in the wellness industry. Diversity of thought, diversity of practice, and also accessibility to everything that we're offering.
Right.
Because it's so lacking. So my work, I take it everywhere I go. So on my Instagram, you can find videos of me playing in the subway.
I saw that.
Yeah. So I'll have random chats with people on the subway. Sometimes the whole cart is engaged in talking to me about sound, about meditation, about mindfulness,
Very cool.
and how it can reduce your stress and help you relax. So I love taking this anywhere. Sometimes I'm, button-up shirt in a corporate office. Sometimes I'm at a seminar presenting to physicians or financial professionals. And sometimes I'm even at like an underground techno rave, bringing this work there.
Oh, yeah.
So really one of the beautiful things about sound is that I don't need to speak. I don't need to be confined by the judgment values that are attached to language in order to communicate the power of it, because everything around us is vibrating constantly. Like even this table, which we think is solid, is just vibrating so quickly that it appears solid. Because every single thing around us is constructed of vibration, this is a language that we fundamentally understand on a physical level, on an emotive level, and on a cognitive level. So it's not just addressing one part of the body, one part of the mind or the heart and separating us. It's actually taking the entire human being, and it even, animals benefit, all living creatures benefit from this work because it takes the entire creature and speaks to the creature on many different levels.
I love it. And I can feel it. I know you're right.
Yeah, it's great. And so the tenets of my practice really are 3 basic principles. Getting intimate with ourselves in a space of silence and recognizing that silence really is just unactivated sound. So it's just the unstruck sound. Nice. There's still vibration present in silence. But getting intimate with ourselves in silence, getting intimate with ourselves in a space of deep listening, which Pauline Oliveros really put on the map, and then getting intimate with ourselves in the space of sound, in our relationship to sound. And that includes all sounds around us. So this work really, when we have something like a sound bath, which a lot of people call it, I use that term sometimes, but it can also imply passivity on the part of the people that are in the space with you. So I'll use it sometimes, but it's not my preferred language. So if we have like a sound experience, a sound meditation, some kind of work using these types of instruments or vocals, which voice is actually the most powerful resonator that we can use.
And you have an amazing voice. I've heard you.
You're so sweet. Thank you. Yeah, go to my Instagram. You guys can all hear me.
It's really, really nice. That's where I heard it.
It's nice because with those short videos, I can give people I can inject some relaxation into their day. For sure. They don't have to pay $50 to come to a class, And if they are sick or in bed or devastated, they can just listen to it.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the awesome thing about this work is that when we are in the womb and we're developing, so the first moments of our life, we're actually in that silence. So we're intimate with ourselves in that space of silence. Then we move into a state of deep listening, where our first experience of sentience is the mother's heartbeat, the vibrational sounds and feelings of her organs, of the pumping blood, and then eventually the deep listening of people that are, interacting with the womb, the sound vibrations coming in from outside into the womb. And then we are born and we move into sound. So one of the first things we do when we're born is like this sound production, right? Yeah. So those are really kind of like how Feldenkrais created this whole school of movement. For me, my practice with sound really follows the natural progression of us as human beings from the time of conception. Nice. Yeah. So it's really amazing. And some of the awesome things that this work does is when you hear these vibrations, they're really stimulating the vagus nerve, which is also known by a lot of specialists as like the love nerve. Mm-hmm. You can stimulate it lots of different ways, but one of the quickest and most powerful ways is actually through audible means. So you stimulate the vagus nerve, which causes a shift in the nervous system. We go from this like stressed out reptilian state to a rest and digest in the prefrontal cortex. Something else that happens that's really cool is I'm playing these physical waves, which are bouncing around and through your body because you're made mostly of water. So they actually are massaging you from the outside in and then from the inside out. So another thing that happens there is when your nervous system starts to relax, your blood flow moves from the limbs to flooding the organs, bringing oxygen, nutrients, really flooding all of the lymphatic system. So we start to drain the lymphatic system. Nitric oxide, when we use specific frequencies, there has been a lot of research done, and that shows that nitric oxide starts to spike, and that's what we call it. And nitric oxide is actually released in 6-minute cycles. So there's like an ascent and a descent. And in 3 minutes, it stimulates the active nervous system, and then in 3 minutes, it stimulates the rest and digest. So it's like this regulator for the nervous system. And so using specific frequencies, we can actually help to induce more of a state of balance. So these are just some of the things that we're kind of leaving space for in these practices. I don't ever tell people that this is exactly what's going to happen to you. This is exactly what it's going to do to your body, because as you know, with your experience, you know, with living in your body your whole life, as all of you know, our bodies respond to things so uniquely and so differently that maybe at one point some of these things happen, and then at another point, at another sound practice, they don't. But when we enter into any kind of sound meditation, we create space for these things to be possible.
In worst cases, you're just relaxed.
Exactly. But some people do find that their mind races. Mm-hmm. The other thing is, as I said, that would be like more the physiological way that this affects us. The physical. So that's like how it's affecting your biology. Yeah. But if we want to talk about cognitively,
let's talk about it.
See, we're going through all the three,
let's go.
The 3 parts of the body. So if we're talking about cognitively, if I make this sound, so for some people that's like, oh, it sounds so amazing, right? That sounds beautiful. But for other people, it might remind them of a church, and they might have been treated poorly in a church. Mm-hmm. And that's actually like something that has happened before.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Been there.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Me too. Or this sound. To someone that might sound really relaxing and beautiful, to someone else, it might trigger some kind of memory where maybe they went to temple and they were discriminated against. Or maybe even they heard something drop that was metal and something terrible had happened to them. So the thing about this practice is, from a cognitive standpoint, we all have memories attached to sound.
That's right.
Like if you think of certain songs, as soon as that song comes on, it's going to make you feel a certain way because you have a very strong memory attached to it. And because of that, our response to sound, and this is another reason why I don't use sound healing, is because if I use the word sound healing, that's going to give people the expectation that they're going to attach to that I'm going to be healing them, right, or that what I'm doing is going to feel really good. But sometimes our growth comes through triggers and confronting our traumas, confronting those things that have happened to us that we haven't moved past or through or integrated yet. And because of our memory association with sound, our response to these practices is so unique and different every time, depending on the sounds that are played.
And I like that is what you're talking about too, because that is very, very true. Everybody's response is completely different based on their perception and all the life experiences led up to the present moment.
Exactly. Wow. Exactly. And then something else that's really cool about the cognitive aspect is our brains actually tend to focus more when we're learning something new or experiencing something new, because we're making new connections in our brain. So a big part of this work is that, for the most part, it's usually improvisational, which means that I don't go in with like a sheet music or a pre-planned set of instruments that I'm gonna play it in this order, or I'm gonna sing this particular riff. And that's because, one, I'm interacting very actively with the people in the space. So I'm aware of their breathing, I'm aware of their facial expressions, of their body language, of their energy, very aware of what's going on, because there are all of these conversations happening in the room. Yeah. So by being able to work in an improvisational way, I'm able to actively respond to them in the moment and have an active interaction with them. Another thing is that they don't know what's coming. If I'm always doing the same thing all the time, then I'm not really enhancing and utilizing that aspect of how the brain responds to newness, which is a great mindfulness tool and brings people into the present moment. So by activating and really studying this work so that you can improvise in an appropriate way constantly, one that speaks and is digestible to the people in the space, that's really powerful because it helps them to constantly be processing new information, so it brings them back to the present moment.
Yeah.
And it's through external it's through like an external initiator, which differentiates it from a lot of different meditation practices.
Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you, I liked it, the sound stuff, because I have that like super busy brain, and it really does help to just, because you don't know what's coming next, to just put a little bit of quiet in there. And then you're right, and then people can just do their own little internal stuff with that too. Exactly.
It's like when you're watching TV, you don't know what's coming next, and you can kind of like, a lot of people can shut off a lot better, which is part of the reason why TV is so popular. But here we're actually doing something that kind of carries with it that connection and has that bridge associated with it and already integrated inside of the practice. And at the same time, it's doing all those, like it's leaving space for all those physical things to be possible as well that we just talked about. And then from an emotional standpoint, there are a number of things that happen. So this work can be done really privately or in a group. A lot of people have typically experience it like in a sound bath or a group setting or some kind of event or festival. And there are a couple awesome things that happen there. In that space, the practice is at once completely 100% uniquely yours, very protected, very safe, very individual. But at the same time, it's also a completely community-oriented practice because you're all speaking this fundamental language that doesn't need words and isn't confined by words. So the freedom of expression really opens people up. People allow themselves to be vulnerable. They allow themselves to really be 100% with themselves and with other people in full connection at once. And that's a very freeing thing, especially in a society where we're so individualistic, but where we long for community. So this is a way to release the pressure of you having to, you know, that performance pressure that people sometimes have in like other kind of practices. You don't really have that here because people have their eyes closed, everyone's laying down, and we're all speaking the same language without having to speak. Right.
You don't have to this move and this move on time.
Exactly. Yeah. And there are other sound practices that include like mantra and things like that. Since my focus is really widest range of accessibility, when I use my voice, unless I'm specifically doing mantra or kirtan, I stay away from words and I just use raw sound.
Nice.
And the purpose of that is, again, to remove these value judgments that we cling to. Because inherent is that in that is self-judgment as well. Because we're essentially like saying, this is a table has this value. And that's what language, one of the things that language does. So by removing that and that pressure, I'm also removing the view of and the practice of you thinking the whole time, this is me in mindfulness, this is me being mindful, this is my value in that.
I love that. And the person can just make it their own with whatever they hear. So it's for everybody, languageless.
Yeah, exactly.
All can hear.
Yes. And even if you're cognitively or audibly impaired, like you can still benefit from this. Because as we talked about, it has like all these different ways of affecting us. And one of my favorite stories is about Helen Keller, who she actually would listen to music, obviously by putting her hand on a speaker. And she was so in tune with the vibrations that she would describe like trombones and French horns and all these things with such an incredible accuracy, and she had never heard her entire life.
So that just goes to show you when you turn on some other senses, what we can really perceive.
Yeah.
So
when we leave space for ourselves to show ourselves how amazing we are, then magic can happen. That to me is actual magic. Is everyone not telling you that you need to raise your frequency because you don't, I'm not trying to tell you that you need to change. I'm not trying to tell you that you need to be at this specific vibration because life is full of all different kinds of vibrations. And if you can know yourself intimately, experiencing all those vibrations, responding to all those vibrations, then you can really come at a place of self-compassion, self-love, because you know yourself so, so well, and you can't help but then see the power that's inside of you, what you're capable of.
Yeah. And what I like about that, and then just maybe for people that are just listening that have like just autoimmune pain or just other things too, and I think a lot of us, or at least I can speak for myself, was just like flying blind, like not even knowing to feel my body, to pause for a second, because I was the Tasmanian devil and could not slow down, like could not. But in doing that, and I find that this stuff really helps me, excuse me, but tell me about anybody else suffering from this. What do you think they can gain from it, and how that experience really does open up? And you've sort of touched on that, but anything you would just tell people about this, what, you know, anything more?
Yeah. So I do recommend that people actually integrate this into their regular self-care practice. So I know a lot of people like to go like once to a sound, they're like, okay, cool, I've experienced it. But really, because the benefits of this are compounded, so the more you go, the more you're training your brain to get into that rest and digest mode quicker. As soon as then you start hearing these sounds and coupling that with deep breathing, you're teaching yourself to breathe deeply no matter what is around you. So because of that, I really recommend that people go to this practice at least once a month, or find a private practitioner or a guide that you really resonate with that can work with you, especially if you have kind of a chronic disease, disorder, or something that you really feel like you're grappling with. I would recommend coupling this with a private type practice in sound, because there are all different modalities of sound. We can have sound therapy, sound massage, sound baths, sound meditations. There are all different ways that this can benefit someone. And really going to a private practitioner, you're going to be able to tailor how best to do that. Because this is really one of the most powerful tools, because it's the core of what we're made of, is vibration.
And so, and I will tell you, if you actually, and this is one of the things, because this is what I like about Another Way, you actually have to try it yourself to actually know what it is, because sometimes it's a little bit hard to describe. And so if somebody wanted to find you, tell us about your events and everything coming up, and then we'll put them in the show notes too, so that you can go on the podcast app, YouTube, Facebook, see everywhere that you can reach her and find her stuff. But just let's talk about that now for somebody listening on the fly.
Yes, thank you. So the best way really are two ways, is to sign up for my newsletter. So we'll have a link for that. And then also to follow me on Instagram and connect with me there. I actually do respond to people. And it helps me because I can see your face. But you can also find my videos there, which provide you with like a little bit of relaxation and peace. We'll have my website up. Some of the places I'm going to have events this month, and I'm only here until the 21st of January. And then I go back to New York, where I'm based. So I have some spaces for private lessons. So if you want to DM me on Instagram or just message me, we can do that and set that up. I'm going to be at Atma Bhakti. I'm going to be at Yoga Factory, Black Swan Yoga. On 111, we're doing this amazing multi-studio event. And every Friday, actually at 5, while I'm here, I'm going to be leading a 30-minute sound experience at the Refuge Meditation.
Nice.
Where I'm also right now doing a teacher certification for others on how they can guide sound meditation and really integrate this work into their lives. And another way to find me is just to practice with me. Set an alarm on your phone for 3 times a day. Maybe set the reminder to say, pause, listen, breathe. And then start practicing that way. And we're practicing that together then, because I do that too.
I love that. I love that. And it does not hurt anybody to stop, listen, and breathe.
Exactly.
I just want to thank you so very much for being on and spreading all of your wonderful knowledge, and then catch her while she is in Dallas for a private or for any one of these events, or New York or anywhere else in the world that she goes. And for all of you listening, thank you so much. And you know, there is always another way.